It's interesting you mentioned the Defense Secretary. Mr. Carter had been strongly criticized in China for building up island and trying to dominate South China Sea. I'm not asking about the security, but if China had been tried to breaching the security order, do you think China also tried to do it in terms of economic order in this part of the world?
Listen, the only thing I really want to say about the South China Sea is that all claims need to be made in accordance with international law, and in particular the law of the sea. And freedom of navigation and overflight is the linchpin of security in the Pacific. But, sir, I really am not here to talk about that. I'm the Assistant Secretary for Economic and Business Affairs, and that's really not something that I think you should speak to some other experts in the U.S. government.
But there's a parallel thing I have in mind, that China have been criticizing the global economic order that is biased toward the rising economy. They are especially mentioning about IMF and World Bank. Of course, you know that the BRIC countries set up their own monetary mechanism and also their BRIC bank these days. Do you think China had a point when they mentioned or tried to push the reform in the IMF or World Bank?
President Obama has spoken out in favor of IMF reform, but I think you're touching on a broader issue that I'd love to have the chance to clarify. Often it's been misrepresented that the United States is somehow against the AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is what you touched on when you spoke about other development institutions. And that's absolutely not true. It's absolutely not true. We know that the infrastructure development need, infrastructure investment in Asia writ large, is so much bigger than the resources of the AIIB, the ADB, and the World Bank combined. And the way to meet those needs is to have private sector involvement. And of course, the private sector will seek the highest possible standards as they approach these markets. And what we've argued from the beginning is that AIIB should partner with the World Bank, it should partner with the ADB, share best practices, and make sure that we're all integrated into a global economic architecture. That's what we're looking for, and I think it's misrepresented to say that we are trying to prevent that from happening.
So the U.S. had never discouraged Taiwan of joining in the AIIB?
What America has encouraged is that the AIIB takes advantage of the 70 years of learning that the World Bank has, and that it is put into the economic infrastructure and architecture that already exists. That's what we've been encouraging. We aren't discouraging people from joining. We're encouraging the institution itself to uphold those standards, and are hopeful that the AIIB will again partner with the existing infrastructure.
So looking back in retrospect, do you think that maybe U.S. should take a different kind of approach to AIIB when it first started a few months ago? That by saying that the U.S. is interested in participating, and maybe it can increase the transparency in the AIIB?
I think that I disagree, sir, with the framing of your question. We don't disagree with our approach. Our approach has been consistent from the very beginning. We, America, are not going to join any additional institutions at the moment, but if another one comes, we welcome it because there is a need, but we welcome it as it fits into the existing economic infrastructure and architecture, and we encourage something of the scope of the AIIB to partner with the ADB and partner with the World Bank and really do extraordinary work. We don't have any hindsight regrets. We've been consistent with our story. They've just been, in some cases, misreported.
Okay, another thing. Yesterday, China and Korea had signed this FTA agreement, and this had some psychological impact on Taiwan. Maybe there's a real impact in terms of trade and other economic development. How did U.S. see this kind of agreement? You encourage that kind of thing, the bilateral agreement, or do you think that it's something you should examine it very closely?
America has been consistent in encouraging high standard free trade around the world. And that's why we're trying to conclude this historic deal, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And if we're successful in concluding it, then we hope to conclude the Transatlantic Trade Investment Partnership, which together would encompass maybe even 2/3 of the world's GDP, setting the highest standards with our friends around the world. And that's what we're focusing on right now.
Okay. Let me quote Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong when he talked about in Shangri-La Dialogue. And I said, China and U.S. will not carve up the Pacific into two spheres of influence. And in the long term, he hoped China would join TPP and U.S. and Japan would join AIIB. It seems to reflect some of the thinking in Asian countries. They are afraid that they're going to be caught up in the fight between China and United States, and they'll have to be forced to take side. What do you say to that kind of thinking or mentality?
What I say, and again with the deepest respect, is I don't agree with the framing of your question. You're saying to me that there's this sides to take between America and China, and I say to you that the American-Chinese relationship has never been deeper or broader. The strategic and economic dialogue that we have across government is rather extraordinary. Every area of the interagency is working together with China, and in fact, my bureau, along with USTR, have already had 19 rounds of negotiations for bilateral investment treaty. We are not at all about taking sides with China. And your question about China joining the TPP. I mean, Michael Froman has been very clear. U.S. Ambassador, USTR Michael Froman has said, when we close this deal, we will consider other interested economies, and if that economy is willing to reach the high standards that we are setting, then we will be considering their entry. No one's ever said that China wasn't able to apply, but we're focusing on closing it first, and then we're going to look and see what other economies out there are willing to seek the high standards that we're setting for the world.
With due respect, I'm not talking about my opinion. It's Lee Hsien Loong's.
I think it's wrong to frame it that way. America is partnering with China in any number of areas, and I was just there with the Secretary of State at APEC not too long ago, and I met with business leaders in China who were making large investments in the United States, and China's investment in the United States this year is greater than America's investment in China. The economic relationship is something that I focus on, and I focus on all over the world, including between the economies of America and Taiwan. And that's why I'm here. And I see great potential in the bilateral economic relationship between America and Taiwan.